Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. I know this is not the usual type of book that I read and review, but it feels like The Woman in Me by Britney Spears is one of the biggest literary events of the year. Its release has been huge and it's bulldozed its way into the top 10 best-selling books of 2023, at least according to Amazon, and that's after only a few weeks on sale. It bookends a bombshell year in memoir after Prince Harry released Spare back in January, if you can believe that was actually this year, it feels so long ago. And thankfully, this time around, we've not got anyone using their mother's lip balm on their willy. I actually didn't read Spare, but that scene somehow still haunts me. So obviously this book has been on my radar because of its huge media hype. But also, I'm a child of the 90s. Britney has been a pop culture staple throughout my entire life. I remember when she first appeared in the public eye, Baby One More Time had just come out and a poster of her had appeared on the bedroom wall of a family friend. I admired it right away, not only because she was instantly iconic in her school uniform, but it was a useful cover for a kid like me trying to hide my sexuality in a very homo-hostile lads mag culture of the late 90s and early noughties. But since then, Britney has had so many more iconic moments. The double denim, the VMA's Python, the Madonna kiss, just to mention a few. Even as recently as last month, when most celebrities would be pretending they've been lifelong readers and they're so excited to have their new book about to be released, Britney went viral for Dancing with Knives. The point is, Britney's presence in the media is fascinating in and of itself, and this book offers more than just a peek behind the curtain. For me, it's a chance to reminisce about my own life, a chance to reminisce about growing up in Britney's world. Before we get into the content of the book, I want to talk briefly about the fact that it's ghostwritten. It's pretty widely known at this point, but despite her name being on the cover, Britney didn't write this book herself. And apart from a small introduction, the audiobook isn't read by her either. Audio is how I read the book, and it's really admirably narrated by Academy Award winner Michelle Williams. So you might be wondering, if she didn't write the book and she hasn't narrated the book, to what extent is this actually Britney's story? Look, I'm well aware that a ton of celebrity memoir is written with the help of or entirely by ghostwriters. I'm not going to go into any huge depth about the ethics of ghostwriting more generally, but if you do want to have a deep dive on that topic, Jack Edwards recently did a pretty great video about it, which I'll link in the description. But in this case, I think it's an important question to at least touch on, given the context of the brutal conservatorship Britney has lived under for a pretty significant portion of her life. We as readers and supporters of Britney, particularly those spending £20 or $20 on the book, want to make sure this is a break with that narrative, not a continuation of it. This book was written by a man called Sam Lansky. Lansky is a journalist and author who has written for plenty of publications that you will have heard of, like New York Magazine, The Atlantic, and Time. He's interviewed loads of celebrities and big-name pop stars, including Adele and Madonna. As far as I can tell, this is his first ghostwriting gig, but he's previously written a novel and, more relevantly, his own memoir about his experience of substance abuse addiction and recovery. Though his experience is obviously very different, he's been through difficulties in his teenage years just like Britney, and he's been to rehab just like Britney, and so seems pretty well placed to write this difficult story. Britney's previously written on Instagram about writing the book and how it was healing and therapeutic for her. I am very happy for her to get this opportunity, and if I'm totally honest, reading the caption does make me appreciate the choice to use a ghostwriter. So yeah, overall, for me, there are no red flags here to suggest Britney's story is being manipulated. It's unavoidable that this story is going to be filtered to some extent through Lansky's thoughts and feelings about Britney and his own experience. Just like any writing, really, but it is crucially different from a journalistic piece or a biography published under his own name. His job is not so much to think critically about his subject, but to present her perspective authentically and in her own voice. That does mean Britney is likely to be painted in a more carefully crafted, positive light, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And really, this was bound to happen no matter how this book was written. The idea of the author as an island is a bit of a fallacy. We like to think a person hides away in a dark room with their laptop and emerges with a fully formed work that gets sent straight off to the printers, a direct line from the author's brain to ours, only through the medium of a few hundred pages of paper. But that's not really how publishing works, and it takes a village to release a book. Editors in particular have a huge influence, and a very extreme example of that is Raymond Carver and his editor Gordon Lish. Carver is famed for his short stories, which have this style that's like really sparse and exact, but it's a style largely sculpted by Lish. There was a compilation released a few years ago that included edited and unedited versions of Carver's stories, and the difference between them is pretty wild. Some of them seem almost completely rewritten. As I say, that's a very extreme example, but it shows how much influence editors have. All of that is to say, I think it's absolutely fine, and probably for the best, that The Woman in Me was ghostwritten. Britney deserves to tell her story. After all, it wouldn't exist without her, and she shouldn't need to be a great writer in order to tell it. While a self-written manuscript might feel more authentic to us, it wouldn't necessarily be so. On the audiobook front, I think it's absolutely understandable that Britney wouldn't want to read it herself. It's a very painful story, and I can imagine it was really hard to write. Sitting in a booth reading it over and over would be a really difficult experience for her. As I say, Britney does do the introduction and sounds very sincere and grateful to Michelle Williams for carrying the torch. My high-level thoughts of the book, though, is that it's a really well-written book. It's not tightly written, it's conversational, it's a bit unpolished, it's full of tangents, and it's actually quite blunt in its delivery. She's not holding back her emotions or feelings, and there are some really heavy things she shares. But what I think it does really well is to capture Britney's voice. I felt like it was her, or at least the version of her that we've come to develop this parasocial relationship with over the last few decades. The book is written in an episodic way. There's lots of short chapters covering snapshots of her life. Although not explicitly in sections, it does seem to me like there are three pretty important arcs that she works through. The first is her youth and adolescence, her rise to fame, then her relationships with Justin Timberlake and Kevin Federline and her experience of becoming a mother, and then finally the conservatorship. Let's tackle them one by one. The start of the book does a great job of contextualising Britney's family. We quickly get an idea of the general family dynamics, but also some specific details that have shaped her family history. And like I said, this stuff is really heavy. In chapter 1 alone, there is the loss of a baby, there's domestic violence, child sexual abuse and suicide. And it's eerily foreboding that her grandfather, June, placed 2 of his 3 wives forcibly into mental hospitals. In fact, that is one really clever thing I think the book does well throughout. There are often these little details like this that tie moments together or allude to something not mentioned directly in the book. For instance, when she's waiting for the outcome of her Mouseketeers audition, she takes up basketball and describes herself as being a mouse scuttling around the court. And when Justin Timberlake is there to kiss Britney for the first time, a Janet Jackson song is playing in the background, alluding to the Super Bowl controversy of 2004. All of this works to successfully and very quickly set the scene and establish Britney's place in it. She's an anxious little girl for whom singing and dancing is an escape, and whose talent is an opportunity for her family. But because her family is so dominated by this fragile masculinity and its history of abuse, it's also a threat. Britney is forced to grow up very quickly. Part of that is because she started working so young. It amazes me how we see child labour as something like straight out of the Victorian era, unless it's in show business. Lots of now well-known celebrities are introduced to us in this book as children, including Natalie Portman, Kerry Russell, Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling, and yes, Justin Timberlake. And these kids are seen to be working grueling schedules and put into a lot of adult environments. But Britney also seems to grow up quickly, even on top of that. I was shocked to read about her age 13 driving her mum around and drinking daiquiris with her, smoking cigarettes, and then at 14 having sex with older boys. It was like a trope-filled messy millennial woman novel, only she wasn't in her early 20s, she was in her early teens. She was enabled to do these things because it was advantageous and convenient to those around her. Once she becomes famous, though, it's convenient for her to remain frozen as a teenager. There's a line where she says, "At what point did I promise to stay 17 forever?" And from what she describes, it's like she was stuck at 17 from the age of 12 all the way through to her late 20s. There is so much toxicity attached to her fame as she achieves it, and much of that is particularly around her being a woman and the projection of her age up or down to 17. When she's younger, she deals with so many creepy questions about her body and her sex life, and when she's older, she's criticised for dressing provocatively and being a bad influence. She rightly calls out the double standard of this treatment. Men get asked about their music while women get asked about their breasts. Men get labelled as studs while women get labelled as sluts for the exact same behaviour. I'd like to think in 2023 we're through the worst of that, but I still think it's pretty pernicious, particularly in the British tabloids, but also in some parts of American entertainment reporting. A huge thing in this part of her life is her relationship with Justin Timberlake, who I'm afraid to say does not come off well. I won't go into too many specific details, and you've probably seen news about some of the revelations from the book, but there's a scene in particular where she's in pain and clearly in need of medical support, and he thinks the right way to help is to play her some songs on his guitar. Absolute trash. He cheats on her, he dumps her by text, and he places the blame very visibly and publicly on her shoulders. It is awful behaviour. But something that's really interesting about the book is that despite all of this, there is very little vitriol from Britney. She comments on these things, she recognises them for what they are, and yet she's still in admiration of his talents even when she's being treated like crap. The breakup from Justin clearly affected her a lot, and it didn't really set her up for a particularly successful and healthy relationship when she meets Kevin Federline. It's enraging to see his selfishness taking advantage of someone who is clearly vulnerable, but at the same time, it's a relationship that gives Britney her children, who she clearly and deeply loves. But, my God, having to experience motherhood under the watchful eye of the paparazzi sounds absolutely terrifying. It broke my heart reading about her being followed and goaded and called out during what is probably one of the most vulnerable times in a woman's life. I'm not a parent myself, I'm already tired enough, but I know from friends who have kids that it's really hard. You get scared and you make mistakes and you get paranoid about the impact of those, but my friends don't have those mistakes photographed 1,000 times and amplified on the front pages of gossip websites. And all of that's mixed up with the fact that Britney now realises she was suffering from postnatal depression. It's so sad and it's so awful. The thing is, I don't want to paint this entire phase of her life as negative. It sounds like she had some great opportunities and made some wonderful friends with people she admires. Paris Hilton and Madonna are spoken of really warmly, and I loved the scene with Mariah Carey being a pioneer in the use of ring lights. Michelle Williams absolutely nails Mariah's intonation in the audio. Britney also seemed to get enormous creative satisfaction out of working on Blackout. I remember at the time feeling a little bit conflicted about it because it's an album that I really love, but it felt like one that had been born out of a really difficult time for her. To know she loves it and loved working on it, it's just really nice to hear. The relationship with Kevin doesn't last though. It does break down and she's basically tricked into being the one to file for divorce, meaning she has to pay for it all. Again, she is admirably defensive of him and doesn't want people to be overly critical of him. But things do take a turn for the worst and her children start to become pawns used to manipulate her. Reading about the conservatorship is really difficult. I just can't fathom at all what it's like to lose that much control over your own life. And it's all happening against the backdrop of even more intense public scrutiny. She describes the paparazzi at this time being like sharks circling when there's blood in the water. Britney's father, Jamie, is a spectre that hangs over this whole book, but in particular during this latter third. There's one particularly chilling interaction he has with her right at the start of the conservatorship when he takes away this bowl of receipts she uses to manage her expenses and tells her, "I'm Britney Spears now." But aside from that, there are actually not very many direct interactions, and it doesn't feel like he's particularly present in the book. I do understand why, given the pain he has caused her, but it does make it a little harder to build this sense of his character. Nevertheless, the control he exerts over her is shocking. She's told what she can eat and what she can't eat, when she can go to the bathroom, and her home is bugged. If she wanted to go out with a guy, her full sexual history was disclosed to him before the first date. Maybe most tragically though, she felt her creativity, the thing that had given her so much joy since she was a small child, had been completely destroyed. She became a cash cow for her father and family, apparently too ill to look after herself, but well enough to go on multiple world tours and complete a multi-year residency in Las Vegas. On multiple occasions, she's carted off to one rehab facility or another for very small infractions against what's deemed acceptable behaviour. And throughout this, all she has to cling to is that compliance with these horrible, horrible rules will be a reward of time with her kids. She says, "My freedom in exchange for naps with my children. I'd lay down my life for them, so why not my freedom?" To be put in that position at all is bad enough, but for it to be her father being the one taking advantage of her love for her children, it's horrendous and heartbreaking. Many people see this book as an opportunity for justice, for Britney to finally say her piece after being shackled by the conservatorship for 13 years. And they're right, this is exactly that. But this book feels like an act of restorative justice rather than a punishment for those who have wronged her. And I think she and Sam Lansky have accomplished that mission. This is a book that I think, despite its heavy themes, works to build a really positive empathy between Britney and her readers. Hearing the glimpses of joy she enjoyed from working on certain creative projects, from time with her children, and from the support from her fans and the Free Britney movement, it's a testament to the positive mindset with which she's approached sharing this story. The conservatorship is over, but her story isn't. And it isn't all smiles and rainbows. Even since writing the book, she's split with her husband Sam Asghari, and it's sad to hear her talk of him so fondly in it. She has suffered a lot, and I can only hope she gets the space she needs to fully heal. If you have any interest whatsoever in Britney Spears or in pop culture more generally, I'd really recommend reading this book. Let me know if you've read the book and what you thought of it. I'd be really interested to hear how you felt. working through some of these really heavy topics. This is probably my longest review today, and if you did enjoy it, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my content, hit subscribe and you'll get a new video from me about once a week. But until next time, toodles.